Let me verify your seat assignment.
Of course. My boarding pass shows seat 2A.
I noted the time and the details.
Could I have an apple juice, please? 16-year-old Zoe Reilly asked softly as she settled into seat 2A near the window of Horizon Crest Flight 612 from Boston to Atlanta. She wore a navy school hoodie, simple jeans, white sneakers, and a small backpack covered with pins from a summer academic program. Her hair was braided neatly, and a silver bracelet from her late mother rested against her wrist. It was Zoe's first time flying home alone after 6 weeks at a science institute, and though she looked calm, her fingers kept touching the edge of her boarding pass as if checking that it was still real. Her father, Marcus Reilly, had purchased the first-class ticket because he did not want her changing terminals alone after a delayed connection. He was supposed to join her after arriving on another flight, but his connection was running late. 2 rows behind Zoe sat Helen Whitfield, 68, a retired federal judge with short silver hair, a dark green coat, and a small black notebook resting on her knee. She noticed Zoe smile at the flight attendant and thank her twice. She also noticed Diane Cross, the senior flight attendant, stop in the aisle and stare at Zoe longer than necessary. Diane looked at the hoodie, the backpack, and the empty seat beside her. Then she looked toward the boarding door as though waiting for someone else to claim the place. "Young lady," Diane said, "I need to verify that seat." Zoe held up her boarding pass. Diane did not take it. She only glanced at the name and said, "There may be a mistake." Helen opened her notebook and wrote the time. What happened in the next 10 minutes would leave Zoe too afraid to fly alone again, expose a false airline report, and create a rule that every employee in the company would later learn by the name of the girl sitting silently in seat. Faye Diane Cross was 54 years old and had worked for Horizon Crest for 26 years. She was efficient, confident, and deeply certain that experience had taught her how to identify problems before they became visible. Her supervisors praised her ability to keep boarding on schedule. Junior employees, however, knew that Diane often treated instinct as evidence. If a passenger looked confused, nervous, too young, too poor, or simply out of place in a premium cabin, Diane believed extra control was justified. She called it judgment. Others quietly called it bias. That afternoon, she had already corrected 2 passengers over carry-on space and warned a family that their toddler could not stand in the aisle. When she saw Zoe alone in 2A, she decided the ticket was probably an upgrade error or belonged to someone else. Priya Nair, a 29-year-old junior flight attendant with dark hair tied in a neat bun, stood nearby holding the cabin tablet. "I can scan it," Priya offered. Diane shook her head. "I know what these mistakes look like." Zoe held the pass out again. "It has my name and seat number," she said. Diane glanced at it but never placed it under the scanner. Instead, she said, "Sometimes boarding passes get forwarded or printed incorrectly." Zoe looked around, embarrassed by the passengers now listening. "My father bought it for me," she replied. Diane's tone hardened. "That is not proof that you are supposed to be here." Helen Whitfield wrote the exact words and the time beside them. She had spent 30 years listening to witnesses, separating memory from evidence, and learning that the first version of a story was often the one people later tried hardest to change. Zoe remained completely still. She did not cry or argue. The stillness unsettled Helen because it looked practiced, as though Zoe had been taught that staying calm was sometimes the only protection she had. Priya quietly opened the passenger manifest. The screen showed Zoe Reilly, seat 2A, paid and confirmed. Before Priya could speak, Diane made a decision that would turn a private assumption into a public injustice. "Stand up, please," Diane said. Zoe looked at her, confused. "Why?" Diane reached for the blanket on the empty seat beside her and folded it sharply. "This seat needs to remain available while we verify the booking. You can wait in the rear cabin." Priya stepped closer. "Diane, the manifest shows her name in 2A." Diane turned slightly so only Priya could hear. "I will handle this." Then she addressed Zoe again. "Do not make this difficult." The cabin had gone quiet. Zoe's hands trembled as she gathered her backpack. "Can you please scan the ticket first?" she asked. Diane replied, "I do not need instructions from a child." That sentence caused Helen to look up from her notebook. A businessman across the aisle began recording on his phone. Another passenger lowered her book and watched closely. Zoe stood, her face expressionless except for the shine gathering in her eyes. Diane took her boarding pass, but instead of scanning it, She placed it on the galley counter and pointed toward the back. You can sit in 27C until we sort this out. Zoe looked at the long aisle filled with faces. That is not the seat my father paid for, she said. Diane answered. Then your father can speak to customer service after we land. Helen wrote the sentence exactly. Zoe walked toward the rear cabin while passengers watched. She passed rows of strangers carrying her backpack against her chest like a shield. Priya remained frozen near the galley, staring at the manifest that still showed Zoe in 2A. When Zoe reached 27C, she found the seat already occupied by a man traveling with his wife. Diane had not checked that either. The man stood and offered Zoe his place, but Zoe shook her head. She sat on the empty jump seat near the rear galley instead, looking down at her shoes. Back in first class, Diane placed a coat on seat 2A and told Priya the issue was resolved. Helen closed her notebook for a moment. Then she saw the boarding door open again, and a tall black man in worn travel clothes stepped onto the plane, breathing hard from running. Marcus Reilly, 45, wore a charcoal sweater, wrinkled travel pants, and running shoes damp from the rain outside. He carried no assistant, no security detail, and no expensive luggage, only a leather messenger bag and a phone with a cracked corner. Ground staff had waved him through because his boarding pass showed seat 2B. He thanked them, stepped into first class, and immediately noticed that Zoe was not beside the window. Diane smiled professionally. Mr. Reilly, your seat is ready. Marcus looked at the empty 2A, then down the aisle. Where is my daughter? Diane's smile tightened. There was a ticket issue. We moved her temporarily. Marcus did not raise his voice. He placed his bag on the seat and turned toward the rear cabin. Helen watched him find Zoe in less than 30 seconds. He did not call her name loudly. He simply stopped in front of her and looked at the way she sat perfectly still, shoulders drawn inward, hands folded over the bracelet on her wrist. Zoe, he said quietly, what happened? She looked up and tried to smile. It is fine, Dad. Marcus crouched beside her. No, it is not. That was when Zoe's eyes filled, though she still refused to cry. She whispered, She said the ticket might not be mine. Marcus stood and returned to the front with Zoe beside him. Diane met them halfway. Sir, I already explained there was a verification concern. Marcus held out his hand. Please scan the ticket now. Priya picked it up before Diane could stop her and placed it under the reader. The screen flashed green. Seat 2A, Zoe Reilly confirmed, paid in full. The cabin heard the soft confirmation tone. Marcus looked at Diane and asked one question. Why was that not done before you removed her? Diane glanced at the recording phones and said, Your daughter became uncooperative. Zoe's head lifted in shock. From 2 rows back, Helen Whitfield uncapped her pen again. The airline's second mistake had just begun. Priya stepped forward. She was not uncooperative, she said, her voice low but clear. The ticket was valid when I checked the manifest. Diane turned toward her. This is not the time. Marcus looked from Priya to Diane. Then when is the time? Helen Whitfield closed her notebook and stood. She moved slowly into the aisle, holding the black book in one hand. Diane looked at her face and went pale. Years earlier, before joining Horizon Crest, Diane had been involved in a civil case concerning a workplace retaliation claim. Helen Whitfield had been the federal judge who presided over the hearing. Diane recognized her immediately. Helen did not announce her title. She simply said, At 2:18 you refused to scan the ticket. At 2:20 you told the child that her father's purchase was not proof. At 2:22 you ordered her to stand. At 2:23 you said you did not need instructions from a child. At 2:25 you directed her to an occupied seat without checking it. The cabin was silent. Diane stared at the notebook. You were recording me? Helen replied. I was documenting what I witnessed. The businessman across the aisle raised his phone. I recorded it too. Another passenger said she had captured Zoe walking toward the back. Priya quietly opened the crew reporting app and typed her own account before anyone could tell her not to. Marcus remained calm, but his hands had tightened into fists at his sides. My daughter should not need a billionaire father or a retired judge to make her ticket valid, he said. Diane's eyes shifted at the word billionaire, but Marcus continued. And that is not the most important thing about me. He explained that the Reilly Justice Foundation funded legal aid for families fighting schools, hospitals, landlords, and transportation companies when they could not afford representation. Diane had not only humiliated his daughter, she had created exactly the kind of case his organization handled every week. Before the plane pushed back, the captain contacted regional operations. Someone at headquarters began drafting the first official report, and the wording of that report would soon become more damaging than the incident itself. The aircraft departed 35 minutes late after Zoe was returned to seat 2A, and Marcus sat beside her. Diane was removed from service for the flight and replaced by another crew member, but the airline treated the situation as contained. Regional Operations Manager Paul Denton, 51, received a hurried call from the captain and opened an incident template before speaking to Zoe, Marcus, Priya, Helen, or any passenger witness. His first draft described a minor seating dispute involving a juvenile passenger who became distressed during ticket verification. It stated that the crew moved Zoe for operational safety and that the issue was resolved after her guardian arrived. None of that was accurate. Priya later saw the report on the crew portal and felt sick. She had already written her own private notes, including the fact that Diane never scanned the ticket before removing Zoe. Helen's notebook contained the same sequence, with matching times and nearly identical quotes. During the flight, Marcus asked Zoe whether she wanted to sleep. She shook her head. "What if they do it again when you are not there?" she asked. Marcus did not promise it could never happen. He said, "Then we make sure there is a record strong enough that they cannot pretend it did not happen." Helen overheard and placed her card on Marcus's tray table. It listed her full name and former title. "Your daughter did nothing wrong," she told Zoe. "Silence does not mean agreement, and calm does not mean weakness." Zoe held the card carefully. By the time the plane landed in Atlanta, the passenger videos had begun circulating online. The clips showed Diane refusing to scan the ticket, Zoe walking through the cabin, Marcus asking for verification, and Priya confirming that the manifest had been correct. Horizon Crest's public relations team prepared a statement about a misunderstanding. Then Priya uploaded her notes to the internal investigation portal. Helen sent a signed witness statement with exact timestamps. 2 independent records matched each other line for line, and the airline's cover story collapsed before it could be released. By the next morning, the video had spread across social media and reached national news outlets. The public reaction focused not on Marcus's wealth, but on the image of a 16-year-old girl being sent from first class without anyone scanning her valid ticket. Horizon Crest Chief Executive Laura Benton, 57, called an emergency meeting with legal, operations, customer care, and the board's ethics committee. Paul Denton defended his report by saying he had relied on the crew summary. Priya's notes proved that Diane had been warned in real time. Helen's statement proved that Zoe had remained calm and cooperative. The scanner logs showed the first actual scan occurred only after Marcus arrived. Laura looked at the evidence and asked, "So the ticket was valid the entire time?" No one answered. She asked again. "Yes," General Counsel said. Then another file appeared. 5 prior complaints against Diane Cross had been closed over 6 years. 2 involved black passengers. 1 involved a Latino college student. Another involved an elderly woman using a discounted premium ticket. In every case, Diane had described the passenger as confused, disruptive, or difficult. None had resulted in formal discipline. Paul Denton had approved 3 of the closures. Marcus joined the meeting by video, but refused to discuss a private settlement until the airline addressed the pattern. "This is not about my daughter receiving an apology because I can afford lawyers," he said. "It is about the next child whose parent cannot reach the gate in time." Helen also joined briefly and stated that the evidence showed a decision made before verification. Laura suspended Diane and Paul pending investigation, ordered all prior complaints reopened, and appointed an outside law firm to review boarding and seating practices. The board expected Marcus to demand money. Instead, he proposed an independent audit funded through his foundation, with public findings and no control by Horizon Crest. Laura agreed. As investigators began pulling records, they found that Diane was not the only employee using appearance-based judgment. The problem was larger than one flight, and the consequences were about to reach far beyond one career. Over the next 8 weeks, outside investigators reviewed scanner logs, crew messages, passenger complaints, training records, and interviews from 12 airports. Diane repeatedly claimed she had acted for safety. The records showed otherwise. She had not identified a security threat, a duplicate ticket, or a payment issue. She had simply believed Zoe did not belong in first class and searched for a reason after making that judgment. Paul Denton admitted he had written the first report before interviewing anyone, because he wanted to control the story before the videos spread. That admission cost him his position. He was removed from regional operations and later resigned. Diane was terminated for discriminatory conduct, falsifying the basis for a passenger removal, and ignoring a valid manifest. Priya received formal protection as a whistleblower and was later promoted into a training role, though she told investigators that recognition did not erase her regret for not challenging Diane sooner. The audit found broader weaknesses. Crew members could remove passengers from seats without a mandatory scan. Reports allowed vague terms like disruptive or uncooperative without requiring exact quotes or witness confirmation. Complaints involving minors were not automatically escalated. Marcus rejected a confidential settlement and instead asked the airline to fund legal counseling for Zoe, reimburse affected passengers from prior cases, and create an independent passenger rights office. Laura Benton accepted the conditions publicly. Zoe attended one meeting but spoke only once. "I do not want a rule because my father is rich," she said. "I want a rule because the ticket was valid before anyone knew who he was." That sentence became the center of the reform. Horizon Crest introduced mandatory electronic ticket verification before any passenger could be removed from an assigned seat. Any dispute involving a minor required a second employee review and a written incident code. Staff began calling the new policy Zoe's Rule. The name embarrassed Zoe at first, but it also gave her something the original incident had taken away: proof that what happened to her would not simply disappear. The public consequences were clear, but Zoe's private recovery was slower. For months she woke from dreams in which she stood in an airplane aisle while strangers watched and no one spoke. She avoided wearing the navy hoodie she had worn that day. When school resumed, classmates recognized her from the video, and some asked questions with good intentions that still made her feel exposed. Marcus arranged therapy with Dr. Lena Brooks, a psychologist who worked with teenagers after public humiliation and discrimination. In one session, Zoe admitted that the worst part was not losing the seat. "It was that she looked at me and decided the ticket could not be mine," she said. Before she checked anything, she already had an answer. Marcus listened from the waiting room and realized that his money, influence, and legal knowledge could create consequences, but they could not give Zoe back the innocence she had carried onto the plane. Helen wrote Zoe a letter in careful handwriting. She explained that courts often depended on people who noticed details and refused to let them be rewritten. She told Zoe that her calmness had not caused the injustice, and that speaking softly did not make her less powerful. Priya visited one of the new training sessions and read her original notes aloud to a room of flight attendants. She stopped when she reached the line where Diane said she did not need instructions from a child. "That was the moment I should have stepped in," Priya told them. "A policy matters only if someone is willing to use it." Marcus's foundation created a small legal support program for minors traveling alone, but he kept Zoe's name off it at her request. She did not want to become a brand. She wanted to become herself again. 6 months after the incident, Horizon Crest invited Zoe to observe the first live test of the new policy. She agreed, but only if no cameras were present. The real question was not whether executives could apologize in a boardroom. It was whether an ordinary employee would follow the rule when no powerful witness was watching. 1 year after the incident, Zoe returned to an airport wearing the same navy hoodie she had once hidden in the back of her closet. This time she was traveling to another academic program, and she had chosen to fly alone. Marcus walked with her to security but stopped before the checkpoint. "You can still change your mind," he said. Zoe touched the silver bracelet on her wrist and smiled. "I know." At the gate, she sat quietly with her backpack between her feet. Across the waiting area, a 12-year-old boy traveling alone approached the priority line with a boarding pass folded in his hand. He wore an oversized sweatshirt and looked nervous. A gate agent glanced at the ticket, then paused. For 1 second, Zoe felt her chest tighten. The agent did not make an assumption. She scanned the pass, saw the green confirmation, and called a second employee to verify the minor travel note. Together, they checked the record before asking the child to move anywhere. "You are all set," the agent said. "Your seat is 3A. Let me show you where to board." The boy smiled with relief. Zoe watched him walk through the gate and felt something inside her loosen. No one knew she was sitting nearby. No executive was present. No retired judge was taking notes. The policy worked because the employees followed it when nobody important was watching. On the plane, Zoe found seat 2A and placed her backpack beneath the window. A flight attendant approached and asked, "Can I get you something to drink?" Zoe looked out at the runway, then back at the attendant. "Apple juice, please." The answer brought her back to the first flight, but this time the memory did not control the moment. The ticket had been checked. The seat had been honored. Her dignity had not required a famous father, a judge, or a viral video. It had required only the truth. If this story moved you, comment, check the facts first. Like, share, and subscribe to EchoStory for more stories about dignity, courage, accountability, and justice.